listening to the Midnight in Kentucky Monthly Weird Report. A Patreon exclusive podcast.
Night owls of all times, places, spaces, and ages, the full moon has risen once again, and you are listening to the Midnight in Kentucky Weird Report, a Patreon exclusive on our takes on some of the biggest stories on high strangeness from around the world and right here in the Bluegrass. The date of this recording is September 2nd at 1600. For MIK and the Weird Report, I'm Ben.
I'm Jamie.
And we're going to jump right into it this evening, Jims, with some real sciencey shit that I didn't understand the first time through. I don't know that many will unless you're a quantum physicist. This comes from the MIT Technology Review. I actually come across this article through a Popular Mechanics article that was written this July of this year. This article was written in March 12th of 2019. There's a subscription on Popular Mechanics that I don't want to pay, though. But same article, talking about the same thing. The name of this article is A Quantum Experiment Suggests There's No Such Thing as Objective Reality.
So, is there like no such thing as us? I
think it means, from my understanding of it, this whole experiment was based on physicists that were trying to prove a theory correct, that if two people engage with the same object at the same time, then their perspective of it and their reality of the thing, and reality in general, basically all lies in the eyes of the beholder. It kind of goes into that whole beauty lies in the eyes of the beholder thing in general, if you think about it.
It does. I mean, we talked about it for years, about how I can look at one thing and you're going to look at it. Technically, I feel like we're going to see it different. Like the whole, even something as simple as brown eyes, blonde hair, whatever. It's going to be a different shade or a different look to you versus me.
Yeah.
But then it almost rules out the whole, well, my mom taught me my shapes and she said this was a circle. This was a square.
Or is that just the...
That's how we're trained.
Yeah. Is that just the collective decision that this is what a square is? And who says that a square, like, it would be the same...
The square looks different.
Right. Like, okay. The square would be the same, but it would be the same symbol to you.
The same word.
Right.
Officially.
Right. So, yeah, that's a good point, too, because we could be talking completely different languages now, assuming this from an outside observer. And I mean, this is where that shit gets really weird. Like, colors is the big one for me. Like, the color blue may look completely different to you than it looks to me. And there are people that talk about that.
And I don't want to say, like, colorblind's not real, because obviously it's very real. But at the same time, colors are colors. And my red ain't your red.
Yeah.
I've believed that forever.
No, that's a good point. This also is kind of the slit experiment. I don't know if we were talking about that. I don't know what that is. But, like, if I recall correctly, I think it's called, like, I can't remember. But it was basically this experiment where there were these particles in this, like, petri dish or whatever. And there was a scientist observing them, and the particles would only move or would only start to do things when he observed them. The observer effect is what this is called in like mainstream science.
I mean,
well, not mainstream, but you know,
we're kind of taught that, though. We're taught that it goes into the whole, and I hate this question. I've hated it for years, but does the tree make the sound in the forest? If the tree falls, you're not listening.
So you know what that is, though? Like that question. That's a Buddhist koan. That that.
Sorry, I hate it.
But no,
it's like
the whole point of that question is to put. But the whole point of that question is to put your mind in a state. It's like doing a magic ritual, right? Because we've talked about this. Like, ritual puts your mind in a certain state where things start to become more malleable.
But
that's what that whole koan is. If a tree falls in the forest, does it make a sound? Is literally asking the question, and has been asking the question for thousands of years. If you're not there to see it, does it exist?
which goes into the whole how I've lived my whole life.
Mm-hmm.
If I eat a steak, it didn't come from a cow because I didn't see the cow it came from. Like, you know, that's how I've lived.
Oh, no, you've always done that.
And I think that's why I always thought the tree thing was stupid to me. I'm not saying like it's stupid in general, but it just
it's definitely
gets on
a
my
cliche
nerves.
at this point. Not one of the better Coens, I would say.
But I feel like that's the whole thing. Because you don't exist to me if you're not there to me. Like we drove to Tennessee one day and I was like, those people don't exist till I get down there. And you cracked up for a minute, but then you're like, yeah, see where you're coming from. But I've always felt that way. Like, people in another country aren't there. I've never been there. I don't know that they exist. I don't know that people's in that country.
I mean, in a way, it's an extreme version.
It's very extreme.
Of not believing anything until you see it, or not believing that anything exists out of your...
I believe stuff without seeing it.
No, I know, I know. But you don't believe...
Reality. I have a reality separation thing.
Yeah, that might be called dissociation.
Okay, well, I've got it.
But, I mean, it does kind of play into this. Absolutely. Let's read the article.
Yes.
I'm reading the whole article. Strap in, because I think all of this is important. Here we go. Back in 1961, the Nobel Prize-winning physicist Eugene Wigner outlined a thought experiment that demonstrated one of the lesser-known paradoxes of quantum mechanics. The experiment shows how the strange nature of the universe allows two observers, say Wigner and Wigner's friends, to experience different realities. Since then, physicists have used Wigner's friend thought experiment to explore the nature of measurement and to argue over whether objective facts can exist. That's important because scientists carry out experiments to establish objective facts. But if they experience different realities, the argument goes, how can they agree on what these facts may be? That's provided some entertaining fodder for after-dinner conversation, but Wigner's thought experiment has never been more than that, just a thought experiment. Last year, however, physicists noted that recent advances in quantum technologies have made it possible to reproduce the Wigner's friend test in a real experiment. In other words, it ought to be possible to create different realities and compare them in the lab to find out whether they can be reconciled. And today, I'm going to butcher this name, Massimiliano Proiti at Heriot-Watt University in Edinburgh and a few colleagues say they have performed this experiment for the first time, that they have created different realities and compared them. Their conclusion is that Wigner was correct. These realities can be made irreconcilable so that it is impossible to agree on objective facts about an experiment. Wigner's original thought experiment is straightforward in principle. It begins with a single polarized photon that, when measured, can have either a horizontal polarization or vertical polarization. But before the measurement, according to the laws of quantum mechanics, the photon exists in both polarization states at the same time, a so-called superposition. Wigner imagined a friend in a different lab measuring the same state of the photon and storing the result, while Wigner observed from afar. Wigner has no information about his friend's measurement and so is forced to assume that the photon and the measurement of it are in superposition of all possible outcomes of the experiment. Wigner can even perform an experiment to determine whether the superposition exists or not. This is a kind of interference experiment showing that the photon and the measurement are indeed in a superposition. From Wigner's point of view, this is a fact that the superposition exists, and this fact suggests that measurements cannot have taken place. But this is a stark contrast to the point of view of the friend who has indeed measured the photon's polarization and recorded it. The friend can even call Wigner and say the measurement has been done, provided the outcome is not revealed. So the two realities are at odds with one another. This calls into question the objective status of the facts established by the two observers, says Protiti and company. That's the theory. But last year, Kászló Bruckner at the University of Vienna in Austria came up with a way to recreate the Wigner's friend experiment in the lab by means of techniques involving the entanglement of many particles at the same time. The breakthrough that Protiti and company have made is to carry this out. In a state-of-the-art 6-photon experiment, we realize this extended Winger's friend scenario. They use these 6 entangled photons to create 2 alternative realities, one representing Winger and one representing Winger's friend. Winger's friend measures the polarization of a photon and stores the result. Winger then performs an interference measurement to determine if the measurement and the photon are in the superposition. The experiment produces an unambiguous result. It turns out that both realities can coexist even though they produce irreconcilable outcomes, just as Winger predicted. That raises some fascinating questions that are forcing physicists to reconsider the nature of reality. The idea that observers can ultimately reconcile their measurements of some kind of fundamental reality is based on several assumptions. The first is that the universal facts actually exist and that observers can agree on them. But there are other assumptions too. One is that observers have the freedom to make whatever observations they want, and another is that the choices one observer makes do not influence the choices other observers make, an assumption physicists call locality. If there is an object reality that everyone can agree on, then these assumptions all hold. But Proatidi and Co.'s results suggest that objective reality does not exist. In other words, the experiment suggests that one or more of the assumptions, the idea that there is a reality we can agree on, the idea that we have freedom of choice, or the idea of locality, must be wrong. Of course, there is another way for those hanging out onto the conventional view of reality. This is that there is some other loophole that the experimenters have overlooked. Indeed, physicists have tried to close loopholes in similar experiments for years, although they can see that it may never be possible to close them all. Nevertheless, the work has important implications for the work of scientists. The scientific method relies on facts established through repeated measurement and agreed upon universality, independent of who is observing them, says Proatidi and Co. And yet, in the same paper, they undermine this idea, perhaps fatally. The next step is to go further, to construct experiments creating increasingly bizarre alternate realities that cannot be reconciled. Where this will take us is anybody's guess, but Winger and his friend would surely not be surprised. That was a lot.
Would this not alternate the timeline? Or create 2 dimensions? Or...
Yeah, there's 2 alternate realities.
Yeah.
One reality is your reality, one reality is my reality.
So we each have our own dimension?
Everybody does.
Is that what that's saying?
Yeah. I mean, to me, that's what it
I
says.
thought we were like in a dimension
Here's
together.
the thing, though.
And then there's like 2 Ben and Jamies.
Well, that's... Okay, so that's a
dimension.
different idea in quantum mechanics, which
But
is the multiverse theory, basically. That there
I have
are
a Ben
as
and Jamie here. We're doing this. You have a Ben and Jamie there, and y'all aren't doing this. Or
I mean, yeah, that's the multiverse theory. That's kind of... That's a whole other thing with physics.
Sorry, I'm kind of... The article was... Whew.
Oh, it was a lot, and there was a lot of science talk. But basically what it amounts to me is every time we observe something, we're basing our reality off that. And it's how we observe that object that determines on what our reality will become. Not only that, but our realities... But that sounds simple, but it's a... So our realities, like you can observe something... And it can be something completely different than what I observe. And...
It changes your whole day.
But not only
your whole life.
Not only that, though. Our realities can be unreconcilable. Meaning that you can exist in a totally different place than I do. And they do not have to agree on anything. Which is... Yeah, kind of... Now that I'm saying it, is kind of how reality works anyway. But... I mean, words are what gives us all the ability to talk about this, and words are fickle, like we were talking about before.
In a simple type of situation, though, is that not you have a life-changing event of whatever, a car wreck.
And it changes your reality.
And you take that car wreck different than I do.
Mm-hmm. I would say a UFO sighting. I mean, that's a life-changing, reality-shaping
You know
thing.
what I'm saying, though? Like I said, it changes your whole day. And I'm not meaning just mood-wise, but...
No, it does, yeah.
If you had never experienced it...
I mean, that's definitely, yeah. But also, this is kind of Schrodinger's cat thing, right?
Because if it's not there, it don't exist.
If it's not, like, either there's two possible equations, one or the other, and until you look at it, neither of those things is possible. That's the superposition that they were talking about. Until you observe it, everything is in a superposition. So, I mean, a lot of this, to me, is, and we're going to get into more of this later on in this show, is the connection point between magic and science. Because this is literally you shaping your reality depending on what your perspective of it is.
I think of when I think of that, though? I think of, like, kids going to Head Start, going to preschool. They have that fear of that parent not existing. Mm-hmm. That's why you have so many that break down when their parents walk out that door.
Yeah.
And they don't realize that's what they're doing. But it makes you think of how we were conditioned.
Oh, absolutely.
Because they already have this perception of reality, and we're like, oh no, they're fine, they're out there, you're going to see them at the end of the day type of thing, because this person wants us to believe that way.
Yeah.
Like, it's crazy.
Well, no, and I definitely think that there's something to that as well. I mean, if you want to get real weird and deep with this. No.
I didn't mean to.
I mean, no, I think that's a good place to take it to. Well, I mean, I think we've both really been thinking about the way children are conditioned with Finn going to school. But if you want to get real deep into that, like, I've been thinking about, like, conditioning on a kind of They Live level. Remember They Live? We watched it a while back. On how the dude gets the sunglasses and he can suddenly see, like, all the subliminal shit.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, like, I've been thinking about conditioning on that level, right? Like, and I mean, it's not a far jump to say that that's exactly what happens in schools and in...
Well, I mean, it happens everywhere, but that's one of the moments of disassociation that we try to close the gap with, but at the same time, we're alternating their reality for them.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And see, that's the whole thing. Like, I don't think any of that really existed until the Industrial Revolution.
And kids started going to school.
Yeah, but if you think about the times pre that, like, magic was a big thing, right? I mean, there was a lot of magic, a lot of unknown, a lot of unexplained. And maybe I'm sure that a lot of skeptics would argue that's because science hadn't
came about
or hadn't really developed to that point yet. But I mean, it can also be definitely said that, like, the imagination, which talk to any magician, and they say that the imagination is the most important part of doing magic, which goes right back to this whole thing.
Childhood.
Yeah, and goes right back to this whole thing that we're talking about. The whole you're shaping your reality as you're observing it. Like, but I mean, it's obvious that the imagination gets beat out of children, is it not? I mean, that happens all the time.
How we live, though, because you've got these kids, they're trained to go work a 9-to-5 for the government's sake, because if everybody in this world wasn't working a 9-to-5, what would the government do with us?
Oh, yeah, exactly.
And then you've got people that have learned to live outside of that stay home, that understand that you have to create that reality of that income.
For sure.
Which is the whole idea of entrepreneurship.
Yeah.
But, and I'm not saying that, people failed if they're working at 9-to-5. 9-to-5's fine. But
no, I get what you're saying, though.
They conditioned and split that reality when they took that imagination.
Well, I don't know that.
I think so.
No, for sure, you're right, but I'm not sure that there are definitely forces that cultivate reality, right? I mean, we do it every day. We cultivate our reality just by existing in it. But I'm not sure that. I think that's where consensus reality comes in, which is what they kind of talked about in this article, which is the reality can harden, I guess, or like can solidify in a way
and
when it is agreed upon
by more than one,
by a large group of people. And we see that happen all the time, right? We see that literally happen with governments and with countries, with jobs, with cults, if you want to take it to a weird place. I mean, you see that happen with cults, like those people in the thing that were like, we weren't aware that presidents even existed. You know what I mean? So,
but I mean, yeah, and it goes back even Native Americans.
Yeah, I mean, they
made
lived in their
Adobes.
tribe, and
you
they
didn't go pay so-and-so $10,000 to live in that Adobe.
right, and that was their life.
Yeah.
And that's the whole thing. And I mean, shit, this goes to a much deeper philosophical concept than just weird shit. You can make any life you want to, and it can become your reality. You know what I mean?
That don't mean like get crazy
I mean,
at the start.
Obviously. But
No, for real. It takes practice. It takes
yeah, I mean, it takes
dedication.
discipline.
My God.
It takes being a magician. I mean, that's really what it takes. It takes alchemizing emotions and alchemizing experiences and doing all, like, literally working acts to change your reality. I mean, that can be doing rituals, and that can be cleaning your house. You know what I mean? Like, it can be either one of those. Both will change your
Meditation.
reality. And it takes a balance of both. Meditation, prayer, all that stuff.
But before you move on, I actually did want to say it took all I had to not crack up in the middle of this story because you kept saying the word winger. Probably shouldn't have watched Community right before we got into this article.
I thought that too, which is so crazy because it was Winger and Winger's friend.
And Abed creates his whole reality.
The alternate reality.
Yeah, every episode.
If you guys haven't watched Community, watch Community.
It's on Hulu.
Moving on.
You guys
6 seasons in a
find
movie.
it.
Mars formation that looks like...
Exclusive episodes, merchandise, and much more. Visit us on patreon.com at patreon.com/untitled.